is an aerospace and mechanical engineer. Todd Weaver founded Engineering Inc., or Weaver Engineering Inc., and served as president for 22 years. He founded True Grit Traction Inc., inventing and patenting a new type of wheel for pipe inspection robots, now used throughout the US and abroad. So throughout his career, he's also been involved in many high-impact projects, including the space shuttle, numerous aircraft and aerospace component designs, and even, has anybody been to Universal Studios before? Have you ever been on the Twister ride? Well, if you know about it or you've been on it, Todd helped out with the Twister ride at Universal Studios even. So, director of programs and volunteers here, and actually Todd has volunteered multiple times with our lead rentals, so we definitely love to bring in the community, get everyone together. So, without further ado, Todd Weaver.
The table is the right to clean water. And after my presentation today, I think you'll all want to sign that for obvious reasons. My friend and colleague Marty Sullivan never misses a chance to plug that right to clean water, and I admire him for that. I always forget, so thank you, Marty, for that. So today we're going to talk about something that most of you just either take for granted or don't even think about, but it's probably the most ultimate advancement in human history is our sanitation practices. And as Emily pointed out, I spent most of my career in the aerospace, spacecraft and aircraft design industry, but a friend from UCF in 2002 asked me to come over to a local company called Q's, and they make sewer and stormwater robots, and they were struggling with a design, and so I consulted with them for about a year and came up with their first wheeled transporter that I'll show you a little bit later. But I'm going to have to put my glasses on now so I can read my writing here. So I put a little, this is a model of a sewer robot. They keep getting smaller and smaller as they evolve. Some of the ones that I'll show you that I designed back in the early 2000s are quite large, but they're still being used for various reasons and have done very well. So that's not a shameless plug for my company, because none of you are potential customers, but all of you benefit from this technology, and you'll see that here in a little bit. So our one of our favorite mottos in the sewer industry is, "It may smell like poop, but it's our bread and butter."
That was a dad joke.
That's an image that we definitely might add.
So these are a few of the things that we're going to talk about today. So the level of population right now, there are more people alive today than have ever existed on the planet in our history. And most of this is due to the adoption of sanitation practices. Also life expectancy and our basis of knowledge overall. You can imagine with a life expectancy of about 25 years, the knowledge that was lost by smart young people dying prematurely. One of our forefathers, Benjamin Franklin, was so unique, and he brought a lot to our government. A lot of it was just due to the fact that he lived well into his 80s, which was really unusual for back then. We're going to talk about diseases and pathogens and the vectors that cause them. I'll touch on dumps and landfills. We'll talk about potable water and piping and sewers, of course. And then lastly, we'll look at robotic inspection. So this is the graph that I talked about. You can see over here on the right side, most of those people are still alive today. And if you look at the area under the curve, like I said, there's more people alive today than there has been in all of history. So you can see that our life expectancy wasn't very good for thousands of years until the advent of sanitation practices. And this is more recent, and you can see about the time that our Civil War ended. The Civil War had very little to do with sanitation adoption, but you can see how our life expectancy just started to spike about that time. So these are some of the non-waterborne diseases that have plagued our civilizations for a very long time. A lot of these are still active today. Even bubonic plague, we have instances of it to this day. Britain was especially hard hit, and these are just some photos of a human with bubonic plague, and it even affects wildlife. So they found a squirrel in California that got the plague, and that was what he looked like after his demise. So who do you blame for the plague? So Yersinia bacteria caused it, but these special oriental fleas carried the bacteria, the rats carried the fleas, the humans fed the rats inadvertently because they were leaving trash and other things as food sources around. And as the growth of our cities advanced, so did these pathogens. So even though people, several hundred or several thousand years ago didn't understand what actually the root cause of these pathogens were, they realized that poor sanitation really advanced the growth of them. So during the last couple of hundred years, or even the last 100 years, a lot of these things came about, these new modern sanitation practices. So believe it or not, the first modern landfill wasn't started until 1937. So these are a lot of the waterborne diseases, and they're especially common in places like Africa and around the Amazon and so forth. And we even have Giardia here, and that's why you don't drink mountain water, even if it's coming right off the mountain. These things stay dormant in cysts for a while, and when you ingest water that has Giardia in it, the symptoms are pretty bad. So most of you are, there's a few of you that are too young to remember polio, but back in 1955, I was born the year after the vaccine came out, but my older sister contracted polio, and she was lucky. It only affected one of her legs, but she was in a polio ward for quite a few months, surrounded by people in iron lungs and with horrible muscular problems because of it. So I'm going to talk about potable water. So most cities grew up around water bodies, but some places started digging wells 9,000 years ago, and the ancient Minoans, they started laying water pipes to certain houses and places of industry about 3,000 years ago. And the Mayans in South America actually had flush toilets and aquifers and even ceramic water filters. And if you ever go to Pompeii and Herculaneum, they actually have some of the lead potable water pipes exposed. And some people believe that was the cause of the collapse of the Roman Empire, because the emperors went crazy because they were always drinking water from lead pipes. So in this country, we use wooden water pipes for potable water, mostly for disease control. But this pipe right here was unearthed back in the 1990s, and it was still functional up to a few years before that. It was about 200 years old. So the first sewers are pretty old as well, although they were rudimentary by today's standards. There was a civilization in the Indus Valley that had all of these things, potable water. They collected rainwater, they had private toilets, they had brick and mortar channels, and some drained to the river, and if there wasn't a river close by, they put it in cesspits. The Persians also had some, but one of the most interesting places for me was this Scar of Bray, which was discovered in 1850. A big storm came in from the ocean and uncovered it. It was covered with silt, and they excavated it, and they found that these, they had a creek that ran through this place, and all these little homes were connected with underground stone walkways and tunnels, and every single house had running water and flushing toilets, and you just go right out into the ocean.
Wow.
So the Romans were really the ones that put sewers on the map, so to speak, and they mostly did it for stormwater and marsh draining, for increasing their farmland around these places that they built great cities and so forth. And of course, they didn't understand treatment back then, so it would just flow out into the river or the lake or the ocean. And Pliny the Elder said that Roman sewers were the most noteworthy thing of all. So this thing is called the Cloaca Maxima, and it's actually still in use. They've added sewer treatment, but a lot of the modern city of Rome exhausts their sewage through this giant ancient tunnel that they built. Back then, it just flowed right into the Tiber River, and it was probably a good way to control your enemies downstream by just polluting them. But the word cloaca is an anatomical term that we use now, today, and it's the orifice that reptiles and birds have in common, where all their waste and their reproductive organs come into that before being excreted. And it's one of the reasons it's so hard to sex a chicken. You gotta open the cloaca.
Just follow over.
So if you ever get a chance to go to the city of York in England, they have just a fascinating story there. It's called a minster rather than a cathedral, but it was started to be built in 1250, and it took about 240 years to build it. And the great weight of the thing, they realized that it was settling the foundation. So in the 1960s, engineers went in and devised this way to drill holes through all of the foundations and put these big stainless steel cables together to keep it from splaying out like that. Well, while they were down there excavating, they found a first century Roman sewer system, and parts of it are still functional in the city of York. But it's all laid bare, so if you go there and go down into the excavation, they have crypts and these treasure troves that they found in the open sewers. Obviously the ones that are functioning aren't open, but you can look at all this cool Roman engineering. So Europe was much later as far as adopting sewers, and this gentleman, he was a developer in Paris, and he was putting up these big housing projects, and it wasn't so much that he was trying to do something for sanitation, it was just the smell. So in and around this big, multi-block development he did, he had underground sewers to exhaust the sewage from the area. So when gunpowder was adopted, the English realized that they had this huge treasure trove of potassium nitrate in these cesspits where all the poop would go, and they started, a whole new trade where these guys would go in there and clean out the cesspits, put them on wagons, and take them to the gunpowder factory. Excuse me. So part of sanitation, believe it or not, was due to the building of weapons of war. So Chicago is a radical example of the adoption of modern sewage systems. So it was not a huge town, but you can imagine it was the cattle depot, all the railroads filtered to there. The streets were just mud and human and animal waste, and it was very low lying. It was right on Lake Michigan, and they were exhausting all the sewage out into the lake. Well, guess where their source of fresh water was? Lake Michigan. So they had these epidemics of cholera and typhoid and dysentery just for decades, and some smart people got together and decided we need a sewage system. So what they did is they started raising entire buildings as much as 16 feet, and this one, the first one, they jacked it up 6 feet, and they had 200 guys on jack screws, and there were people still in the building when they were raising it. It was still a functioning building. And within about a decade, they were raising entire blocks to install the sewage system. So the Romans used basically terracotta or other stones, but they also invented this process called vitrified clay. And there's a lot of vitrified clay here, piping here in the United States still, but it's an oven-baked coating. It's like a ceramic coating on the inside of these clay pipes, and it flows quite good. It doesn't, it's slick enough where waste and so forth just runs through it. But some cities adopted brick sewers because they were so big. And then PVC pipe started to be widespread in the 1980s, and that's what almost everything is built with now. So these are some of the problems that sewer workers encounter: roots and corrosion and the earth settling. And you probably read about Fatberg in London, where this giant 130-ton blob of fat clogged up the main sewer system, and they had to go in and chisel it out little by little. It took years to get rid of it, but when you flush things down your drain, you have to not only think about your own system, but what happens downstream. And those of you that use flushable wipes, they're not. They cause just as much problems as fats, oil, and grease. That's what FOG stands for. So I put a little model of a sewer robot here. There's a video camera on the front, and there's a light head, and these are some of the wheels that we make. But this is what you're looking for. So heavy trucks can crush pipe. Sometimes the joints get out of whack. And the old way of doing it is they just dig up an entire street and replace the whole street. Well, you can imagine the problem. You got the police there redirecting traffic. You have to repave the street. You have settling when you repipe. And that's all going by the wayside now. We no longer dig up streets as a rule. So some of the problems with leaking joints and crushed pipe is not just the water. The water takes in all the surrounding soil from the pipe, and you end up with something like that. So this is a street in Japan, and that took about 4 minutes for that entire street to collapse. And you can see the mayhem that it causes because there's fiber optics and stormwater and electrical wires and all kinds of stuff. And it takes many months to fix that. So I put these slides in here because this was an interesting personal story for me. These guys in St. Louis, they had a union, and they actually crawled through the sewer pipes, and they were shaped like a horseshoe. The Romans invented that design. But a lot of them were killed over the years, and you can imagine being 80 feet underground with little ventilation and how horrible that was. And the company I work for here accused the local salesman for St. Louis, he, was just begging me, can you come up with a way to get these guys out of the sewer so I can sell them some of our equipment? And so, I went out and met with them, and they were very hesitant to do this. And, I found out how many guys had died over the last 10 years, and it was significant enough. And so what Hughes decided to do with my prodding was to offer to train these union workers to operate these trucks and do all the inspection from above ground. And within about a year, they all signed on to it, so nobody crawls through St. Louis sewer pipes anymore. So this was the first video camera. This was pulled through a pipe from one manhole to the other with a cable, and it had real very rudimentary black and white video, and they used those for quite a few years. And then they came up with these chain-driven robots, and the one there on the bottom left has a pan and tilt camera like all the modern ones do. And these are some of the stormwater robots that were designed back in the 90s and early 2000s. And this is a typical truck where those guys that I described before are now above ground in an air-conditioned cab looking at a video monitor to do all this. So the truck has a cable, it has all the electrical and other signal wires going to it. It goes over a pulley down into the manhole, and the robot crawls through the manhole. So in 2002 is when I first went to Q. So this was the robot that I designed, and they still sell this today, and I designed it so it could be modular. So since then they put GPS and sonar and LiDAR instead of video cameras, so they can not only inspect open pipes that don't have much water, they can actually go and submerge it. It's all waterproof. And after I left, one of the other engineers made it steerable. So this was the second robot that I designed in 2006 for Q's. And what's unique about this one is you can take the main robot down the main line and then stuff this little ball camera up in a lateral pipe that goes up to a house or business and inspect that too. So it had this 100-foot long spring that was semi-rigid, and you just find a hole in the side of the main line and shove the thing up there, and you could video record that as well. So this is why we don't dig up streets anymore. So some smart guy back in the 90s came up with the idea of relining pipe. So there are various ways to do this. Most people use fiberglass sleeves. So you pull that down in the manhole and pull it through with a cable, and then you blow it up with hot steam, and it conforms to the inside of the old pipe. And it doesn't matter if it's broken or the joints are slipped or whatever, you can reline it. So what they needed next was, well, you just covered up all the lateral pipes coming off the main line, so somebody invented a robot that goes in and cuts those little holes out, and then a third robot goes back and puts these little things that look like Abraham Lincoln hats without the top, and it shoves it up in that hole and seals it with epoxy. So now you've got a sealed pipe between the lateral and the mainline pipes. So what my company did is, back when I worked for Q's, everybody was using rubber tires, and the impetus is to try to make the robot go as far as you can before you have to reel it back in and set the truck up and cover the manhole up, go to the next manhole, and so forth. So I got the bright idea, since most of the pipes are PVC, how about a grinding wheel, something like that, instead of the rubber tires. So I came up with this type of wheel, and I asked Hughes if they wanted to patent it, and they said no. And of course, within a couple of years, everybody in the industry copied it. And so it took me about 12 years to come up with this idea, but I thought, the problem with these steel wheels is if the robot stalls in the pipe, they act like grinding wheels and just cut slots right in the pipe, right? And I even told Q's that I thought that was a fatal flaw, and they said, nah, put it into production. So I did, but one night I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, if the grit was in some rubber compound instead of exposed on the outside of a steel wheel, so we spent about a year making molds and testing and so forth, and came up with this and got a patent for the True Grit polymer wheels. And then our second patent was a set of adapters that would adapt that wheel to anybody's robots worldwide. So we make about 16 different sets of adapters for True Grit wheels. And this is also part of the patent, was that 6-star pattern on the inside of the wheel. So all of our steel wheels and all of our polymer wheels fit. So this is the last slide. I wanted to shock you all a little bit, but now that you're all fascinated with the world of sanitation, especially sewer and sewer repair, it's notable to understand that 50% of all public works employees will retire in the next 10 years. And how many of you have kids or grandkids or cousins or anybody that is a public works employee? Yeah, same with me. So when we talk about heroes, you know, in our lives, we initially think of the military and police and fire, and they are, but these guys are really the basis of our civilization. And for me, they should be paid well, they should be respected, and we should also encourage younger people to get into this. And our company is going to fund some internships for this very thing. And I've talked to the city of Winter Park's sewer and water division about hiring an intern or two to train people. It's a, you know, even right now, it's a good paying job. You'll never have to worry about being out of a job unless you're one of those crawlers that worked in St. Louis. But the technology is advancing, it's interesting, and we also have to think about, you know, prioritizing our government spending. Are we spending too much on defense? Should we look at infrastructure instead? Should there be some compromise in between? But I just want to leave you all to think about those things, and I'll be quiet now and take questions if you want. I saw the first hand back here.
I understand the early robots were pulled through, but later, was there a different source of power for those when they were sending the things up into the houses and all that?
Yeah, the modern robots like this one have motors on board, so the cable that comes down from the truck has the power and all the signaling to tell the motor to reverse or go forward.
It drags the cable along.
It drags the cable along, and that's why the gridded wheels work a lot better, because as the further it goes down the pipe, the heavier the cable gets that it has to pull. Lee?
Fascinating information. It made me curious about what state the city of Winter Park's sewer system is in. And is that a local budgeted item, or is it something that the state and federal government help out with?
Well, there's certain EPA rules that our sewer and water division have to follow, but they are very on top of our sewer and water system. In fact, they have 2 trucks that go out daily inspecting pipes, looking for problem areas. And in some cases where they have to do relining, they hire a contractor to do that. But you know, other than Hurricane Ian, we really haven't had any serious sewer problems in a long time. And all that's funded by our usage fees. So your utility bill that you get, it includes sewer and water. And by the way, your water bill is, or your sewer bill is based on how much water you use. And so I don't have a sewer bill because I have a septic tank, but I'm still, you know, they meter the water and know how much I use. Okay. I think I saw one here first.
Do they use anything like an inline Morrison pig to clean pipe?
Can
say
you
that
repeat the
again?
question?
Do they use anything like an inline Morrison pig to clean the pipes?
No, they actually have what's called jetters, and again, it's a truck with a hose system, and the nozzles are designed such that they're spraying forward, but they propel themselves by having spray going backwards. So they go through and then they inspect the pipe, and if they're going to reline it, that's always something, those two things they do.
To get rid of roots and things like that?
Yeah, they have root cutters too as part of that cleaning process.
We live in a very flat landscape, and we have to move this material through the system. How does it get moved?
Well, most of our systems use gravity, but you'll notice that around our lakes especially, which are the lowest points, we have lift stations. So, the sewage will come down to a low point, and it's a pump that elevates it, and then gravity takes over to the next pump station or to the treatment facility, depending on where it is. So you're supposed to have about 1/4 of an inch for every 12 feet of drop to make a good sewer system work. You don't want much more than that, because then you have these torrents of stuff, but that's not always best. You want this, perfect flow, in other words. So
Could you explain what happens when the grid goes down?
when the grid goes down, unfortunately, up until recently, we didn't realize that we needed generators for the pump stations, and we had a couple of pretty major sewage overflows that affected Lake Rowena and ultimately the Winter Park chain. And when actually some people that live over on Lake Rowena called me because they knew I was in this business, and after I investigated, it wasn't a problem with the lift station. They didn't have any water issues. What they had was an electrical issue. So they replaced all the incoming electrical lines, and it has a new backup generator. And we're starting to do that around Winter Park too, where we have backup power during.
What's the state of the Winter Park sewer system? Are we facing a lot of aging pipes and gonna have to really do some major work in the near future or not? Have you really looked ahead 10, 20 years and sort of planned ahead here?
Our sewer and water division is really on top of things. They have these master maps, and they have things that they want to replace in the next 2 weeks, the next 3 months, the next 5 years, and all the way up to like 50 years from now. But there are really no major overhauls that we have to do. A lot of times we just do spot repairs where a joint's gone out, and they'll bring a relining rig in and do a section of pipe. But our sewer system's in pretty good shape because we've taken care of it for so long. Patty?
What is the difference between a septic system and a sewer system, and in fact, why do we still have septic as prohibited in certain areas? I'm really sort of unclear on why communities have different.
Well, septic systems are cheap, for one thing, and as part of one of my reasons for running for the city commission, a minor reason was, my whole neighborhood was built in the 50s, and everybody's, including the businesses on Lee Road, are all on septic tanks, and we're surrounded by 2 major lakes. And when we looked into it after I was elected, it was about $60 million just to get, a sewer pipe main line down Lee Road, and then divert it up to Altamont, and that doesn't including any of the neighbors. And then each house would have to pay for a connection, but a septic system is an on-site system, and it usually leaches out liquid water, and then the solids are held in the tank, and that's why you have to pump a septic tank every 2 to 3, 4 years, depending on the use. But I've really pushed for getting us off of septic tanks, especially around our lakes. But again, the low point is the lake, and that's where you have to have land and access for a pump station. They're not small. I mean, they're, you know, some of them are half the size of this room, so you can't just plop it down in the middle of the street and make it work. So,
I
I'm sorry.
have a question also related to the septic system. My brother, Winter Park, at the northern end, northeastern, he just replaced his tank with sewer, and he's the only one in the neighborhood that did it. And my question was, and you kind of alluded to it, the water drains out ultimately through the drain field and all into the lake, but is there an impact on the environment or anything with that sort of thing? And I know a lot of people put chemicals into, you know, eating up the stuff that's in there, you know.
Generally, it goes into the groundwater, and groundwater by gravity tends to flow downwards rather than outwards. But yeah, there is a definite link between nutrient loading in the lake. But I didn't realize this until recently, but it only accounts for about 9% of the nutrient loads to our lake septic systems do. And the majority of it is from street runoff, because we use our lakes here as retention ponds, and we're, you know, little by little upgrading our stormwater outfalls to the lake to remedy that. So we have leaf baskets in almost all of them now. And you'll see these big Vector trucks that take a manhole off and suck all the leaves out, because those break down into nutrients and ultimately bacteria in the lake. And other systems have these swirling things that, you know, it's like a centrifugal or centrifuge, I should say, that leach out, you know, organic things like leaves and branches and things like that. But yeah, we have a big problem with nutrient loading in our lake, and when we have a flood like we had with Ian, and just so you know, the issues that we had with stormwater and sewage here in Winter Park have nothing to do with the Winter Park management of those systems. It had everything to do with the fact that the track of Ian went north towards Jacksonville and flooded the entire St. Johns River. So it was like a dam keeping our water from flowing out. And what happened with our sewer systems is the street water, the stormwater from the street, went into the sewer and mixed. And then when it overwhelmed it, then, you know, you had this mixed stormwater and sewer water coming out into the street and into some people's homes, unfortunately, as well. But it had little or nothing to do with the management of our stormwater and sewer system.
At what point do they mix the stormwater and the sewer water?
Hopefully never. But when you have a flood where the streets are flooded, the manholes have little air holes in them, and the stormwater can go down into the sewer.
Then they come right back up, I saw it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, water flows downhill until you have a flood.
How big are those robots? Is that a real one there, or is that a model?
It's a model, but there are some that are that small now. The ones I showed you were, 30 inches to maybe 36 inches.
Do they have tools attached to them that makes them like go down and scrub, or what do they do when they're down there?
They're inspecting. They're looking for
Just
deformities.
they're not doing any chores.
That
is a chore.
Yeah, so one of the things that our sewer and water division has to do, we can't control the gas companies. If they have customers that want natural gas to their houses, we have to let them do it. But a lot of times the way they tunnel those gas pipes, they go right through our sewer lines. So they have to pay us or a contractor to go in and inspect every single sewer line in a neighborhood where they install gas. And generally, about 2% of the time, they'll find a place where they've pierced the sewer pipe and they have to pay to fix it. Go ahead.
At our house on Gulfside Drive, the house was built in '68, and we determined we had sewer problems that were on our side of the meter, so they were our responsibility. So the line was crumbling. It had never been really, addressed. We had a couple bids come in, and one said, oh yeah, we can jackhammer through your house and fix this. And I said, I really don't want to do that. Luckily, we found what I hoped was a very sophisticated group out of Tampa who had been working down the street on another house. And they said, well, we have 5 different ways of dealing with your pipe, including, blowing in whatever that chemical was. Like, they did it 3 times. And they had the monitors, and they were, nobody was trenching anything, thank goodness. But, of course, it cost way too much money as far as I'm concerned. But homeowners, unfortunately, have, issues, and sometimes have to take involved in these
Why
technology.
couldn't you
also.
just repipe?
Well, that's what they were doing a lot of that. They would sometimes put in a pipe, but sometimes it involved chemicals and lining and I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah, there are quite a few ways to reline pipes. And one of the modern things that I forgot to tell you about, it's called pipe bursting. So when you have like my neighborhood, we had to get new water lines, and they were asbestos jacketed steel pipes, and they're from the 50s. And our sewer and water division determined that they weren't big enough in diameter to handle the load, because we've increased the number of businesses on Lee, and a few houses have gotten bigger as they do here in Winter Park. But so what they did is they used this thing called a pipe bursting machine. So it's a big hydraulic jack that they dig a hole, and it's got a cone-shaped thing with these pipes attached to it, and they actually go through the existing pipe and explode it, and then they pull a new pipe through it that's larger in diameter, and that's one of the new modern systems that's being deployed. Cynthia?
That may be what we need here. We have a 4-inch pipe coming out of this building, and so we might need to burst it, make it bigger. But I recently visited the Orlando wetlands area, and with all the ponds out there, and I wondered if you might describe what we were seeing out there and what Iron Bridge is.
Yeah, that's called a tertiary sewage treatment facility, and it's really fascinating if you want to get into it. But we have primary sewage treatment closer to town. There's a big one in Altamont, another one at Iron Bridge. And what they do is they, as my Australian friend told me, they float the sinkers and sink the floaters. But they're basically getting rid of the solid mass. So the effluent that goes out to that, or from that, goes into another series of ponds, and they basically let the silt just settle. And you'll see tilapia farms use that water. That's why I don't eat tilapia to this day. They have one at University of Florida, and that's what got me thinking about it. But the Orlando wetlands is the final place for silt removal, and you can actually drink that water that comes out of that before it goes out to the St. John's Basin. But yeah, it's a fascinating place, and the amount of flora and fauna that survived because of that, really forward-looking folks from previous generations. It makes a huge difference, and it's a lot cheaper too if you have the land. I thought I saw somebody over here with their hand up. No, okay. Go ahead.
With the explosive growth in this area, how are we planning for that growth with the infrastructure you're describing?
Well, thankfully, I'll use Ravadage as an example. So Ravadage was originally a bunch of smaller single-family homes, and they were on septic tanks. And that developer had to pay to put new sewer lines in and connections and lift stations and all that. So, when a house gets rebuilt, for instance, in Winter Park, there's really not much of an impact there. But if you look at if that happens all over, every single house is torn down and a McMansion is put up, it could cause some issues. But again, our sewer and water division, they know what the flow is, they meter everything, and they just have an enormous amount of data that they can determine where and when they need to upsize a pipe or put a lift station in.
So is the cost for upgrading the sewage system in an area, let's say because you're doing a multi-story complex, who bears the cost of that?
The on-site cost is by the developer, and then sometimes, if it's a huge apartment building, we'll go in on it with the developer from there out to the main line. But thankfully, our sewer and water division is well funded, and part of the reason is we serve areas outside of the city limits, both the east and west, and by law, we're allowed to charge them 25% more than the city residents. And they've really, helped with the flow of money into that. But in fact, it has been so rife with money that we've borrowed from it, that fund. So it's well funded, and I don't anticipate any sewer issues in Winter Park for a long, long time. There's that hand I thought I saw.
This is maybe more of a general question, is how municipalities interact with adjacent municipalities. But so is the Winter Park system entirely closed, including, or does it interact at all with the city of Orlando or Orange County or the municipalities to the north? Is there any connections there? Or?
Yeah, we have all kinds of interlocal agreements on the streets, on stormwater. We have 2 agreements for sewage, and basically the west side of Winter Park, that sewage all flows up to the Altamont Spring sewage treatment plant, and then the east side flows to Iron Bridge, which is Marty, is that a Orlando controlled facility, do you know, or is it Orange County?
I believe it is Orlando.
Yeah, but we don't have a primary treatment system here in Winter Park. I mean, we ship raw sewage to both facilities. But our stormwater system is very integrated with everybody around us, and there's conferences and commissioners and all kinds of people that are involved in making sure, except when Ian comes through, that our stormwater is going to flow freely. Okay, one more back here. I'll get to you, John. Sorry. Go ahead.
So it's an infrastructure question, but it's not sanitation. It's fiber optics. Does anybody in the city know what the process is for how the companies are doing the installation of the underground fiber optics?
Yeah, so we're projecting that to be done in 3 phases. So the first phase has been completed, and we ran fiber optics through downtown to Shady Park and Central Park and a few of the local businesses just to see how it would work out. So we have public Wi-Fi in those 2 parks, by the way. And the second phase we funded about 3 years ago, and Frog Internet and its parent company are the ones that are basically putting in trunk lines on all of our major corridors. So Aloma, Fairbanks, Lee, 1792, and Lakemont, big places like that. But it's just these conduits. Think about it, a sewer system, that's the main line, but there's nothing coming off of it yet. So the third phase will start, depending on the completion of phase 2, we'll start hooking up homes and businesses. But it's probably a good 10-year program to get everybody hooked up. But I think everybody on the commission for the last 10 years supported that. And it wasn't very expensive, believe it or not. But we're all anxious to get it going too. You must have Spectrum.
No, I don't. Yeah, actually, I think we do. But that's part of the question, because it's all painted out. Showing where everything is for stuff to go in. Why are they doing that when we already have underground? We have underground cabling already. So it's just confusing.
Actually, what we did when we undergrounded the electrical system, we pulled an empty conduit through 4 fiber optics. So any place that's already had an electrical system undergrounded, they'll be the first ones in that same order, I suppose, to get these trunk lines. But, you know, there's gonna be places like my neighborhood where, you know, we're gonna have to put in new conduits, but you made me think of something about that. So most people complain about Spectrum, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that because they own the wires and so forth. Clear Channel, they use or Clear, I guess it's called, they just use telephone lines, but it's very slow. But the cool thing about Winter Park's new fiber optic system is that we own it, the city owns it. So Spectrum and these other companies will have to compete for space on that. So you'll be able to pick whoever you want that ties into the system as your internet service provider. But it'll be very fast too compared to the Ethernet that Spectrum's using right now. John, I think you have a question.
Over time, debris accumulates in the sewer pipes and slows down the flow, et cetera. Is there a cleaning program, and how does that operate? Do you inspect for, you know, constriction in the pipes, et cetera?
Yeah, so all of our sewer pipes are on a cleaning schedule. So those jetters that I described to you, you know, it's a high pressure hose with this nozzle on the end. And it has sprays that push the debris out, but it also propels itself by rear facing jet. So it's all done with water. There's no electrical system at all. So after they clean a pipe, we actually make and sell these little tools. They're called manhole tools, and one of the things is this little scoop with holes in the back that you stick down in a manhole when that pipe's being cleaned, and it collects the debris and you take it out and throw it away. But yeah, we really don't have much in the way of clog problems because of the maintenance that our sewer and water division does. Good question.
My last question.
Okay.
If I may. I also enjoyed the trip to the wetlands 2 weeks ago, and a group of us went. And the thing that impressed me so much was when we're talking about the leaching or the outflow from the septic tanks, it doesn't go through the treatment that the water from our homes go through at those lift stations or whatever we call them. So they made a big point about the street storm sewers and how much those are not treated the way the ones that go through the wetlands have so much of the nitrates and stuff taken out, they go right into the river. So what happens with those from the street? People dump oil and paint and all kind of stuff down.
Yeah, if you see anybody doing that, let us know.
Well, the gardeners
It's bad.
horrible. They put all their yard waste and gasoline.
Well, while we're on that subject, one of the ways that our Natural Resources and Sustainability Department control nutrients in the lakes, there are 3, and one of them is potassium, right? Or I'm sorry, phosphorus or phosphate. So, you know, in Florida, there are phosphate mines all over the place. All those rocks out in the front, those are basically, you know, phosphorus and calcium. And so Florida soils have a lot of phosphorus in them already. And when you buy, you know, say 666 fertilizer, you're actually adding more to the lakes than you are to your own ground. You know, the plants can only use so much phosphate, and all that leaches into the lake. So what we're trying to get people to do is when you go to look for fertilizer, just pick the one that has a 0 phosphate or phosphorus in it, and your plants won't starve for phosphorus, but it's really detrimental to the lakes, and we get algae blooms, and the current algae blooms that we have right now could have been controlled had, you know, more people use phosphate-free fertilizer or use no fertilizer. I don't use any on mine. I pump right out of the lake, as I always tell people that my neighbors are buying my fertilizer for me. So yeah, it's a good thing to do if you want to affect the stormwater runoff, is use phosphate-free fertilizer.
What about things like milorganite? That's what my father always swore by when I was growing up. Milorganite, the natural.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
It was from the Minnesota, they scraped the vats, it's from the excrement, from the city. Yeah, Milwaukee.
It's
Yeah.
people.
It's poop fertilizer, so it was natural.
Yeah, but that has a lot of the medicines that people take,
Oh, I never
Yeah.
thought of that.
opioids, full of them.
They're using that all over the,
Well, if
golf
people
course.
use that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Lake Apopka is a good story about that. You know, they had those muck farms all around Lake Apopka, and they dumped animal excrement on it, and within about 30 years, Lake Apopka is so polluted now. And one of the pollutants is actually estrogen from
Really?
the pill. And there are alligators with one testicle, and there are all kinds of fish issues, and it's because of estrogen pollution. But hopefully within the next 20 years, Lake Apopka will be back to normal.
Just a comment to yours. We live on Melrose, and I was up in the office that overlooks the stormwater drainage system. And there was a big vacuum truck pulled up there, and they started dumping all that stuff in a vacuum truck into that storm system.
Oh, my goodness.
So I took a video of it, and I got the name of the company and all that information off the truck. I turned it over to the water people, and they said they'd take care of it. About 3 months later, I saw some of the directors, and I asked them what happened there. They said they ended up fining them over $5,000 for dumping that in there. So
Good for you.
Based
can
on
see
your
those-
video.
You can see those drains and have that little fish emblem on the top of it. You know, that's a stormwater drain. And if you see something like that, they're really looking for that information so they can correct it.
Another thing that's illegal in Winter Park and probably most places around here is your leaf blower guys, your lawn maintenance guys. A lot of them don't know, but they just blow the leaves right out into the street. Well, ultimately they wind up in lakes or in those baskets, and they have to be cleaned more often. So if you see somebody doing that, either ask our natural resources group to handle it, or if you feel confident to ask them to just blow it back in the yard. That's where it's supposed to go.
Break it up.
There's your natural fertilizer right there, those old leaves. Okay,
So
Patty?
you talk about you have a well or you pump it from the lake. I had this discussion the other night about the drought and that some of these wells, it's already low enough, they can't, at what point, we're really in trouble with.
Yeah, normally, I should have said this, normally I pump irrigation water out of the lake, but we haven't been for about 2 months.
Is that because it's too low already?
For me it is, that's a good reason, but we also had a hydrilla outbreak, and the city's been bombing it with herbicides, a specialized herbicide. And if the levels are too high, it'll hurt the grass or whatever. So my yard's somewhat dead right now. The pineapples get watered, but the other stuff not so much. Anyone else?
I have a question, do you see with your office and your colleagues throughout the state, do you see with all of this new development that's happening in Central Florida and throughout the state, where we can say we're not allowing the selling of these chemicals in our state in order to protect our environment? Are we going to put fees on people who use those chemicals? How can we, we're looking at 50% of your colleagues are going to retire within the next 10 years. What are we doing to entice, right, to create this interest?
Well, without getting political, when people get up in arms, to me personally about immigration, I ask them, the same question I asked all of you earlier. How many of your sons or daughters or nephews or anybody, you know, has aspirations of going in this business? And you always hear crickets. Well, the majority of the people that are in this are immigrants, first generation immigrants. And, you know, we're kind of dependent on immigration to a point. And I mean, how many of you have had your roof replaced recently? Have you ever seen somebody that looks like me on the roof? No. How about your yard service? Yeah. What's that? Yeah, and immigration should be legal, but you know, making it an absolute ban on immigration, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot long term. So there has to be some compromise there, in my opinion. But again, I don't want to get political. You had another point. Oh, about banning of chemicals. So, well, the EPA's got a laundry list of things that are already illegal, but fertilizers and specifically phosphate-free fertilizers should be encouraged. And we're, you know, here in Winter Park, we're trying to not, you know, be ham-fisted about it, but we're trying, you know, the educational approach where, you know, people see the effects just since Ian, what has happened to our lakes. I mean, they weren't swimmable, and a couple of them still have blue-green algae issues, and I'm not going swimming in any of our lakes anytime soon. But hopefully it'll, you know, make people start to think about what they're doing on a daily basis, and it's not hard. You know?
No, the reason I asked is, just follow up on Lee's question, is that you see this constant new developments going up around every corner, right? Old buildings are just shut down, vendors torn down, and then new developments go up, and then you see Moss Park, totally new developments all the way to 417 where you used to see wild animals and so on. So where do we, you know, as a state, do we start controlling some of this?
It's tough with the way campaign contributions work. Developers are deep pocketed, and you know, it's a tough nut to crack.
Thank you for your optimism.
Oh, okay, over here one more time.
I just, as far as like public works employees issue, I am in the homeschool community in our area, and you know, there, I think, like I know, like if a lot of the kids knew there was robots involved in the technology of this, I think it's an education issue to a certain extent. And you know, if there was like, you know, just kind of like this, and have some homeschoolers come and maybe not just focus on public works, but other Winter Park departments, and really talk about, okay, what education do you need? Because not a lot of people at homeschool, they are not necessarily, you know, college isn't the goal, it's what their kids want to do, and quality of life issues, and they just want their kids to be successful at life. And you know, so, you know, saying, okay, there's benefits to public works jobs, you know, you're gonna have a job forever, good benefits are good when you work for the government, you know, and talking about all those things. So, you know, it's just an idea. I don't know if that's something Winter Park, you know, would be interested in, but having like a job fair for like homeschoolers, and, you know, and talk about those things. It's just an idea.
So the question was, is should Winter Park maybe have career fairs or something like that? We've actually done that back during the pandemic, not specifically for homeschool kids, but we did get some action, and we're able to hire some new police officers and a few staffers for other things. But the industry that we're in, most of the guys that I know that came up through there, you know, the guys that sit in the trucks and operate the cameras, you know, they learn about computer systems and electrical systems, and you know, the generators on the truck, and now they're putting solar panels on the roof. And several of the engineers that I worked with never had degrees. They learned it all on the job. And I mean, you can learn a lot of other types of things in this industry. You know, it's not just digging ditches and, you know, cleaning out fat blobs. You know, that's a small part of the job, but yeah, there's some fascinating technical things that if kids were exposed to, I think we'd get a lot more takers for those jobs. Well, I guess there's no more hands up, and thank you
Before we end the session, both Emily and I have some things up, but I have two just like trivia questions. How many people do you know, or I mean, how many people do you think roam this earth right now, as far as population? Does anybody have an idea? You win. 8 billion is correct. Right. Yes, that's right. And then the other one, there was a special office created in a major city up north to deal with a infestation problem that they have. Does anybody know that?
Rats.
There you go. What city?
New York City.
New York City, exactly. Major office. Excellent. Thank you so much. Emily?